So I start off with a vignette here of two boys. This is not a specific case that I have encountered. It's more so a compilation of common issues that have come up in my clinical practice. And you can see here that the two children represented in this vignette, Jay and Andrew, are similar in age, because oftentimes these conflicts arise more so in children who are similar in age, who have a similar peer group, go to the same school and such. So I'll just read this, and I'm going to be referring to this vignette throughout the presentation. So Jay is a 9-year-old boy whose 10-year-old brother Andrew has ADHD combined presentation, so that means he has clinically significant symptoms of both inattention and hyperactivity impulsivity. Jay is often annoyed by his brother. Andrew needs several reminders to brush his teeth and get dressed. The boys who attend the same school are often both late because of Andrew's disorganization. Andrew needs his mother to sit with him while he completes homework, and Jay has to wait if he needs help with his. Andrew receives a prize for completing homework without arguing. Jay thinks it's unfair that Andrew gets rewarded for something he is expected to quote-unquote just do every day. Also, Andrew often shouts and has broken several of Jay's possessions. Jay also believes that Andrew's behaviors put their parents in a bad mood. He often complains to his parents that they quote-unquote never get to do anything. All right, so I want to talk about the differences in parenting ADHD children. So basically what an ADHD child might need that a non-ADHD child might not need. So really one of the themes of my presentation here is stressing that when we're treating, we're treating children differently with ADHD versus non-ADHD children, the differences are really in the antecedent strategies. I mean, that's what I would recommend at least. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that in terms of emphasizing differences in antecedent strategies versus consequences. So one thing I recommend is, and when I work with parents, I see quite a range in their perspective on how open they'd like to be about the ADHD diagnosis. Many parents I work with, they want to be open about it. They want everybody working with the child, the school, to know about the diagnosis, for example. And as we know, that acknowledgement facilitates getting the services that many of our children very much need. Other parents are more reluctant to share the diagnosis with others and to the child himself or herself. I tend to promote sharing the diagnosis, and I believe that it can be shared in positive ways. Sometimes I'll actually draw a visual of the brain and talk about, how ADHD impacts the brain in a fun way. You can even have kids create a brain out of Play-Doh, for example, and talk about how their brains are different, but not necessarily, of course, trying to explain those differences in a positive way. One of the my favorite ways that I've heard from other professionals, I have a picture here of a Ferrari, I Google imaged it, is talking about how a child with ADHD has a Ferrari brain that is exceptional and fast and awesome and cool, but sometimes has trouble with putting the brakes on behavior. In terms of explaining the ADHD diagnosis to siblings, I really would have to take it on a case-by-case basis, of course, but if a parent chooses not to share the ADHD diagnosis with siblings, at least talking about how we all have strengths and weaknesses and being open about what everybody is still working on. Every child is working on something. And you can also, when it comes to modifications let's say Jay says, well, why does Andrew only have to do the even numbered math problems and I have to do the entire math sheets? You can explain that modification in a way that benefits Jay. Like, I'm going to have more time to spend with you because I'm giving Andrew what he needs to succeed. And that's really the theme that we want to have. We're giving each child what they need to succeed. And if we're doing that, we're benefiting the entire family system. There's nothing wrong with providing rewards to non-ADHD siblings for behaviors they are working on. Again, we're all working on something. And even though kids with ADHD do need more immediate reinforcement, oftentimes that more immediate reinforcement comes in the form of tokens, which, if the non-ADHD sibling would like tokens, again, nothing wrong with giving them the same antecedent strategies, even if they probably don't need those strategies as much as the child with ADHD. So I have a pair of glasses here because, again, it's to emphasize that, we all have areas that we're working on. So the reason I have the glasses here is that, first of all, there is no shame in, saying I have weaknesses in certain areas and I need strategies or extra supports to get me to where I need to be. And also in emphasizing the role of antecedent strategies versus consequences, that you can actually have similar expectations for an ADHD child and their non-ADHD siblings, such as the expectation that they complete homework. You can have that expectation for all of your children, but the child with ADHD might need to be set up with different kinds of supports to make that happen. Another thing you might want to do just to make sure that to avoid resentment building in the non-ADHD child is try to balance praise between the two siblings. Sometimes I find this helpful. I find this helpful as a parent, almost to keep a checklist, not a checklist, but a count in my mind. It's more like a sense and a numerical count of how much I'm praising one child over the other. And then if I find that the balance is tipping towards one child, in favor of one child, I try to balance it with praising the other. And there's so much that you can praise children for, and you can't spoil a child with praise. Also, I do believe that in, giving a sense of protecting the non-ADHD sibling. As we know, kids with ADHD sometimes are more prone to aggressive acting out behaviors. And it's important to have what's known as standing rules, which basically standing rules imply that there are these very concrete rules, even if you have to write them out and put them on your refrigerator, that lead to immediate consequences. So I'm going to help you get your homework done and such, but if you hit your brother, you're going into timeout right away, or you're getting a privilege taken away right away. So I think that we want to do our best to not condone negative behaviors because of an ADHD diagnosis. So we send off, first of all, we're helping the child with ADHD that way, and we're also sending the message that we're supporting and keeping everybody in the family safe. I have found it helpful sometimes when I'm working with children who are coming with various difficulties related to emotion regulation or other behavioral difficulties, to enlist a sibling in helping their their sibling with ADHD. Of course, you have to keep that person's, the sibling's safety. That's a first and foremost priority, of course. But when helpful, like in terms of homework completion, for example, or helping the child stay focused. And that, again, is kind of a recommendation I give, saying at the same time that I take that on a case-by-case basis. Sometimes it's not appropriate to do that, but sometimes it works really well, so that's why I list it here. Special time is a treatment that's part of an empirically validated approach called parent-child interaction therapy. And I believe it's a great tool to use with all children, so even the non-ADHD sibling, and that entails letting the child lead in the activity, giving specific praise of the child's behavior, trying to ignore some of the annoying but less concerning behaviors that they might show during that special time, reflecting and describing, reflecting on their emotional states and describing what they're doing to show that you're engaged and really giving them positive attention. Another thing, and this again speaks to when siblings are similar in age, it's okay for siblings to do things separately. I've worked with quite a few families where the siblings are very close in age, and there's this hope amongst parents that they're just going to be best friends and they're going to do everything together. How awesome is it that you guys are close in age for that reason? But at the same time, it oftentimes does not work out that way, and that's okay. It's okay for them to be engaged in separate activities. It's okay to do to spend special time with one sibling and then to do something else with the other sibling. You can try to select an activity that both or multiple siblings are more likely to be able to engage in together, like maybe a certain game that's less competitive, or an art activity or a cooking activity, where you find they're less likely to argue and more likely to get along. And you can, that could be a great time to catch them being good, so to speak, good to each other and well-behaved in general, and to give ample praise and even rewards. Like if you want to have a reward system for positive sibling interaction where both siblings or multiple siblings are working towards a big family reward, like getting to go out to eat, for example, that's fine. I would just recommend choosing, short periods of time to implement that system and trying to catch them when they're being good. When all else fails, I am a proponent of, I do believe in fair does not mean equal, and there are very sensitive ways that you can explain this concept. There are certainly insensitive ways that we can state that saying, but I think saying it in a sensitive way, I think could have a great impact on kids. And it's an important concept for all of us to learn, as we're all people to learn as they're making the transition, of course, from childhood to adulthood, that not everything in life is going to be fair, and sometimes that's something to speak up about, and sometimes, that is okay, and trying to explain why that's okay. Okay, and finally, I'm going to talk about mindfulness skills and mindful parenting, with the emphasis here on how your self-care as a parent is going to impact the emotional health of the entire family as a whole. So there are many good reasons to focus on yourself and your own emotional regulation skills, and you don't have to have an ADHD diagnosis to want to do this, because parenting is a frustrating business for everybody, no matter how good your intentions are. And at the same time, we very much want to be positive role models for our children. So here's in a nutshell some steps you can do. And I found this just so helpful as a parent that I feel like I just need to emphasize this when I'm working with parents. Observing your feelings without reacting to them is really the core of mindfulness skills and mindful parenting. You want to actually describe to yourself or use a lot of self-talk. I feel the frustration building up in me right now. This feels really bad. And you can describe that, or, maybe actually not saying this feels bad, maybe this saying, it feels like a tightness inside of me, because we want to stay away from judging language and just describing how that feels and experiencing the feeling within you without doing anything to respond or react to it. You eventually want to respond in a positive way, but you don't want to react impulsively. And you can tell yourself, this feels uncomfortable, this feels bad, although actually I might revise this slide because, again, you want to stay away from non-judging language, but I can stand it. I can stand this. I can do this. Really empowering yourself. Taking some time to understand the function of behaviors, So what the literature tells us is that what makes us the most likely to be ineffective as parents is when we is based on the attributions we place on child behavior, meaning what we think the causes of the behavior are. So he's acting like that just because he wants to hurt me is more likely to lead to poor frustration tolerance in ourselves. I know I would be more likely to snap at my child, at my children, to yell, if I really believe that they were doing it just to get at me. But if we can say to ourselves, what, he really is asking for attention now, not in the best way, but that there is a good reason behind every behavior, even negative behaviors. And just believing in your own inner wisdom to problem solve. You want to be able to shift yourself from a place of being stuck on a negative emotion to a positive place of problem solving. And I hear many parents telling me, they're exhausted. They've been trying these strategies for years, and they've been dealing with these issues for years. and it's tough, and sometimes we do need to take breaks. We need to get a babysitter and go out for a night and take care of ourselves and get plenty of rest and eat well ourselves. And you'd be surprised at how much, inner wisdom you have and how much strength that you have to keep on going. And then I have a whole list of great resources. And I pulled, to be honest with you guys, I did pull from these resources when preparing for this presentation. So I certainly think that they're good ones.
Dr. Kelusklar, that was really great information. So our first question comes from a parent who says that she has a year-old son who has been does not have ADHD, but a 9-year-old son who does. So what she's seeing is that the 6-year-old is starting to exhibit some of the behaviors of the 9-year-old. And she wanted to know if you had any techniques on how to deal with that. Having one child who does have ADHD is older and is somewhat influencing the behavior of the younger child.
Yes, yes. So for that, I would recommend, again, trying to find activities where you're less likely to see some of the problematic behaviors, and having both children participate in those activities together. So for example, like maybe it's kicking a soccer ball outside, but monitoring that interaction so that you can, make it clear what are the appropriate behaviors for this activity and what are the inappropriate behaviors. And again, consistent follow through with consequences. So you're showing as a parent, what you're making it clear, like what's appropriate behavior, and that appropriate behavior leads to rewards and praise, and inappropriate behavior doesn't. And you can actually, I find it helpful sometimes to, you can praise, let's say, you can praise positive behaviors in both the ADHD child with ADHD and the sibling who does not have ADHD. Like, oh, you're sitting really nicely. I would like, so-and-so to also sit really to sit quietly with, with your bottom on the seat, or however you want to describe the expectation.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Kelusklar. So we have another parent who says that he has 2 children, one in middle school and one in high school with ADHD. Do you recommend changes to strategies as they age?
Yeah, I think that you always have to consider altering and modifying and, changing certain strategies as the child gets older to render them more age appropriate. I really think that it's important for a child to buy in to the strategies that you're using so they don't feel like it's being imposed on them.
This is all the time that we have for our webinar, and we really appreciate you, Dr. Kelusklar, answering those questions. And we want to also thank our participants for taking the time to join us today.